Welcome to Article Reviews for the Computational Quran Studies newsletter.
Hello.
Today we're kicking things off with our very first deep dive. We're looking at an article by Jonas Svensson. It's called Computing Qur'ans, a digital humanities approach to the question of interrelations between English Qur'an translations. Quite a title.
It is, yeah. And it's a really exciting starting point for us here at the newsletter. It really showcases how these new digital tools can, shed light on Quranic scholarship.
Absolutely. Svensson's work gives us a totally fresh perspective on how different English translations of the Qur'an might be connected.
It's kind of like building a family tree, but for translations, based purely on the words they use.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack Svensson's research. He looked at 51 English translations.
That's a lot of text.
It is. And he used computational methods to see how they relate to each other based on, like you said, their vocabulary. We want to pull out the key findings, the method, and, why this matters.
Right. And it's important to stress, I think, that you don't need to be a computer scientist to grasp the core ideas here. The insights are valuable for anyone interested in how the Qur'an has been presented in English.
Okay, so let's dive in. The basic question Svensson asked was, are there connections, maybe influences, between these different English translations? How did he start trying to pin that down with 51 texts?
Well, the first step was data collection. He gathered these 51 translations, mostly from IslamAwakened.com, but also pulled some from Tanzil.net and QuarDatabase.org to be thorough.
Okay.
Then he treated each translation as basically a bag of words.
A bag of words, meaning?
Just the collection of unique words used in that specific translation. He took out the really common words, the ones that appeared in all 51 translations, about 873 of them.
Okay, like the and, is, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Those wouldn't tell you much about unique similarity. He also removed bracketed text like interpolations translators sometimes add.
Got it. So he's left with a distinctive vocabulary for each translation. Then what?
Then came the core calculation. He used something called the Jaccard Similarity Index, or Jaccard coefficient, for every possible pair of translations, and that's 12,275 pairs.
Wow.
Yeah. He calculated this coefficient. It basically measures overlap. It's the number of unique words shared by two translations divided by the total number of unique words across both of them.
So a score of 1 would mean they use exactly the same unique words.
Precisely. And Vero means they share no unique words at all. Obviously, you'd expect scores somewhere in between. A higher score suggests potentially a closer textual relationship.
Okay, so it's an algorithmic way to spot potential influence based just on word choice.
That's the idea. It's a quantifiable way to look for textual echoes.
12,275 scores.
Yeah.
That's still a lot of numbers. How did he make sense of all that data?
He used visualization, specifically a network graph tool called GIFI. Imagine mapping these translations as points or nodes, and then drawing lines or edges between them based on their Jaccard score. But to make it readable, he only showed the strongest connections, the pairs with scores in the top 5%, which meant a score above 0.45.
So only the really close relationships show up on the map.
Exactly. And the visualization had other cool features, like the size of the circle for each translation showed how many outgoing connections it had, potentially how influential it was.
Okay.
And the color darkness showed incoming connections, how much it seemed to be influenced by others.
Clever. So looking at this map, this network graph, what jumped out? What were the big findings?
Well, one of the most, I'd say, surprising findings was the role of Ahmadiyya translations.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Despite the Ahmadiyya community being somewhat marginalized within mainstream Islam, their translations appeared quite central in this network graph. They seem to have a significant lexical influence on a surprising number of subsequent translations.
Wow, that is unexpected. You wouldn't necessarily predict that based on, mainstream acceptance.
Not at all. It really challenges assumptions about where textual influence flows from. It's a purely data-driven observation about shared vocabulary.
What else did this computational lens reveal?
Something Svensson terms translation parasitism. It's a spectrum, really.
Yeah.
It could range from just drawing inspiration from an earlier work all the way to, unacknowledged borrowing.
Okay.
And the numbers could be quite stark. For instance, the Jaccard score between M.H. Shakir's translation and the earlier one by Muhammad Ali was 0.70.
0.70. That's really high, isn't it?
Yeah.
Given the scale is 0 to 1.
Extremely high. It points towards a very, very close textual relationship, essentially confirming with data what others had suspected, that Shakir's work heavily reproduced Ali's. It practically screams copying.
So the computation provides almost like forensic evidence for textual borrowing?
In a sense, yes. It gives a numerical basis for claims that might otherwise be more subjective. It's a strength of the method, it's transparency, you can see the numbers.
Hmm.
Another interesting hint from the analysis was a potential trend towards standardization over time. It suggests that perhaps later English translations are gradually converging on a more common set of English words to represent Quranic concepts. Like an English Quranic lexicon is slowly forming.
That makes sense. Okay, so bringing this back to someone just picking up an English Quran, why does knowing about this family tree or lexical lineage matter?
Well, understanding where a translation sits in this network can give you clues. If two translations have a high Jaccard score, they probably share more than just words. They likely share interpretive choices embedded in that vocabulary.
Right, so knowing its cousins might tell you something about its underlying approach.
Exactly. It helps you understand which interpretive tradition, lexically speaking, you're engaging with.
And for students or researchers who are really digging into the differences between translations.
Oh, it's a fantastic tool. You can trace how specific interpretations or wordings might have propagated through a particular family or cluster of translations. You could track the evolution of how a key term is rendered, maybe revealing subtle shifts in theology or emphasis over time.
It really does sound like a powerful new angle. But like any method, it must have limitations, right? What doesn't this lexical approach tell us?
Svensson is quite clear on this. Focusing purely on shared words doesn't capture everything. It doesn't really get at, say, similarities in sentence structure, syntax, or the deeper nuances of meaning semantics.
Yeah, you could express the same idea using very different words or use similar words but structure the sentence to mean something slightly different.
Precisely. So future research could definitely build on this, maybe looking at phrase-level similarities or using more advanced techniques like semantic vector models to compare meaning, not just words.
What else?
Another area is the paratext.
Paratext.
Yeah, things like the introductions, the footnotes, commentaries, glossaries, all the material around the main translation text. That stuff hugely influences how people read and understand the translation.
Right, the translator's own voice often comes through strongly there.
Absolutely. So correlating the lexical patterns Svensson found with the features of the paratext could be really illuminating. Do translations that sound similar lexically also have similar introductions or footnotes?
That would be interesting. And what about the actual impact? Does lexical similarity tell us which translations are actually being read the most?
No, not directly. That's another avenue. Svensson's study maps potential influence based on text, but it doesn't measure cultural impact, which translations are used in mosques, in schools, cited online, bought in bookstores. That requires different kinds of research, looking at diffusion and reception.
So lots of potential next steps.
Definitely. And also digging into the why. Why do these patterns of influence exist? Looking deeper into the translators themselves, their backgrounds, their affiliations, could help explain some of the connections the algorithm flagged up.
It's fascinating how these computational methods can open up so many new questions while answering others.
It really is. And Svensson's approach, using the Jaccard Index, is relatively straightforward conceptually. It provides a transparent, replicable framework that others could potentially apply to different sets of translations, or even different religious texts altogether.
It's a great example of digital humanities in action.
Absolutely. It shows how these tools can complement and sometimes challenge traditional methods of scholarship.
Okay, so let's try and wrap up this first deep dive for the newsletter. We've explored Jonas Svensson's Computing Qur'an's article. He used the Jaccard Similarity Index to analyze the unique vocabulary of 51 English Qur'an translations, creating a network map of their lexical relationships.
Right, and this revealed some really interesting things, like the surprising centrality of Ahmadiyya translations in the network.
Yeah, that was a key takeaway. And also the concept of translation parasitism, using the data to point towards instances of very heavy borrowing, potentially plagiarism, like the Shakir Muhammad Ali case.
And the hint of a gradual standardization of English Quranic terms over time.
It really gives us a new, data-driven way to think about the history and development of the Qur'an in English.
It does. It confirms some things, challenges others, and crucially opens up new lines of inquiry. It highlights how looking at texts computationally can reveal patterns we might otherwise miss.
So, for our listeners, we hope this review has given you a taste of Svensson's work and the potential of these computational approaches.
Yeah, maybe next time you compare two different English translations, you'll think about their potential lexical connections in a new way. What hidden influences might be shaping the words on the page? Svensson's research offers a really compelling starting point for thinking about that.